Okay, by my system, that's 2 o'clock. So it's time to reopen the hearings into the North Warwickshire local plan, following our adjournment at about 12:30 earlier. Can everyone see and hear me? I'll, as I generally do, take a silence to be a yes. Okay, I can see participants. We had a few issues earlier with the raise hand function, but that seems to be nicely resolved now, so thank you for that. Thank you all for being here, for your contributions to date, and for your patience in the event there are any hiccups during this virtual format. Many, if not all of you, were here for the first session today. Nevertheless, it's important that I just canter through very briefly some procedural points. The aim, of course, is to replicate a physical hearing as closely as possible as we can in virtual form. I gave a slightly fuller explanation of who I am, what we're doing, etc., and where we're up to in terms of the local plan examination earlier, but just a few procedural points. So I'm Tom Bristow, the Secretary of State, appointed, I'm not the Secretary of State, I'm appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and ultimately to prepare a report with recommendations to the Council. This afternoon, we're going to look at infrastructure and site delivery under that broad term. Which goes off paragraph 27 of examination document INSP 5B, paragraph 27 onwards of that document. That's on the examination library, which is hosted on the Council's website and maintained by Kerry Truman, the programme officer, who is here on this call and is the first port of call in terms of any procedural questions. We've got a couple of points to return to. I believe it was sections 23 and 25 of the earlier session in terms of a stepped trajectory. We talked about that in theory. Now we're going to look at how that aligns with infrastructure provision. I will try and speak plainly and avoid as far as possible using any acronyms, but where I do say things like INSP, 5B and the like, those are generally local plan examination documents, and it may be useful if you have the examination library open at the same time as we're going through things. The main other reference I will be using is the NPPF, which for this plan is the 2012 version of the National Planning Policy Framework. But please do interrupt me, interject, and put your hand up if anything is unclear or if I'm going too fast. Just to reference, if you've not done so, guidance on the matters of data protection and on the virtual hearings, the format that we're using, those are in examination documents INSP 22, 23 and 24. The hearing is being recorded. It's being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. It is also being recorded via Teams as a record of proceedings until my decision is, my recommendation is with the Council. So the hearing will take the form of an informal discussion led by me on specific matters. I will summarise what I see to be the key issues and invite comments from various parties. Sometimes that will be from the Council first to clarify matters. Sometimes that will be from others. It depends on the context. Can I just ask, is there anyone here that has joined via telephone? There wasn't in the previous session. Is there anyone that's via telephone? Okay. I just say that because I'll come on to how we're going to use Microsoft Teams, the functionality there to organise proceedings, but it works slightly differently if you're dialing in. I would say that any questions or points should be put to me in the first instance, rather than any sort of form of cross-examination, although You may have questions you would like to raise of other parties, but put them to me. I'll determine what further discussion or information is needed, if any. Just in terms of Microsoft Teams, because this is being recorded and screened, just be mindful not to share any personal information, whether that's yours verbally or by putting anything up to the screen, or indeed of any other individuals. You may wish to turn your camera off to obscure your background with something appropriate. Generally, people have been doing that in the previous session and just sort of appearing when they want to say something. But please do let me know who you are when you speak. As previously, if I can ask everyone to mute your connection when you're not speaking, that would be very helpful to avoid any sort of feedback or interference. I intend to have a short break at some point, and to, I mean, on the program on INSP5B, we're scheduled to go until 5. Whether we need that or not, we will see. But if things are going on, I will have a break, maybe in about an hour and a half, and then we'll see where we are. Now, if we do have a break, don't press the red triangle, the red rectangle. My geometry is not on form today. Don't press the red rectangle or leave hang up button when we have a break. Just mute your system and turn off your video, as everyone seems to be doing at the moment. But when we conclude on this particular session for today, that's the time to hit the red button. If you do want to leave at any point, you can do so by hitting the red button without interrupting proceedings in general, and Kerry, the program officer, is there to let you back in if something goes awry. If you wish to speak, and only those who made representations that the plan be modified are entitled to, please use the raise hand function. That is the palm symbol on the taskbar, which may appear differently on your screen to mine, but it will be somewhere, that palm icon. And remember, if possible, to unraise that once you've made your point, so I don't repeatedly come back to you and annoy you. I will get round to you, perhaps not immediately, though, if we're flowing in a certain way. Excuse me. We won't be using the chat function, so there's a chat function in Teams. We won't be using that, and if anyone does accidentally put anything in there, I won't see it. We won't also be using the share screen facility. Having said that, in the previous session where it was useful, I just highlighted a couple of documents in doing that. But please don't use that unless you have my authorization. Just a note. I may look around as I'm doing to write notes, to source documents. I'll try and be as personable as possible. Please don't be offended if you see me doing that. I will be listening to everything that's going on. There may, of course, be occasional technical issues. The program officer and the council are helpfully there to assist as far as possible if that occurs. Any points on any of that? Any issues that are unclear, procedural matters anyone wants to raise, administrative things? Okay. So any information should already be with me and part of the examination library. It may be useful to have the 2012 version of the National Planning Policy Framework in front of you, particularly paragraph 182, which deals with soundness, which is what I'm dealing with in terms of whether or not the plan represents a sound strategy, and if not, whether it can be made so through the use of main modifications or MMs. I will ultimately recommend a schedule of main modifications that may make the plan sound subject to their incorporation. And that is broadly what we are aiming towards after these sessions. a relatively comprehensive schedule of main modifications. Now, given the time at examination and the number of documents I have, it may not be necessary to cover each and every matter in Agenda INSP 5B. In that vein, if I can ask everyone, as everyone did in the previous session, to keep their comments succinct, that would be brilliant. I'm probably the notable exception to that. I will stop you if I've heard enough. If I'm already aware of the issues, please don't take offence of that. Part of the process is me exploring the issues rather than giving a definitive position here and now. So the examination only concludes when my report is with the council, and there will be the opportunity for further comment on potential main modifications, which will be the subject of particular discussion on Thursday afternoon. So are there any questions before we turn to paragraph 27, the issues there in terms of INSP 5B? Just looking to see if there are any hands. Dr. Doggett.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just wonder if I may just add a comment to 26, the end of this morning, having thought about it at lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to I wanted to agree with the council, really, that particularly given H7, the planned development of Dordon would almost double its size. It seems very important for the plan that there is a integration so that Dordon remains as much as possible a integrated community and sustainable and viable as an integrated community. And as such, it would seem very good that the site is not identified in any way like an overspill from Coventry or from Tamworth or from Birmingham. In other words, I'm agreeing with, I just feel like that's quite important, that specific reference is not made to relate to meeting housing needs from outside on a specific site. It would take away from it being an integrated, the desire for it to be an integrated, remain an integrated community, especially on a big development like the development in H7.
Thank you, and I think that's points well made and noted. That paragraph 26 to which Dr. Doggett referred, for those who weren't here in the previous session, was, is it necessary for soundness for specific reference to be made to houses sites that would relate to the borough's housing needs or the contributions that have been agreed to the needs of neighbouring authorities. And Dr. Doggett's position is broadly aligned with that of the council, which we heard earlier. So thank you for that. I should actually, I have forgotten to do my roll call of people here just to check. Clearly we have Dr. Doggett, but just to check that we have everyone here and everyone's systems are working, etc. So if I may just quickly go down through the list of people that I expect to be here, and if you just confirm that you're here, and also if there is anyone here that I haven't got on my list, that'd be useful. Okay, so from the council, I have Mrs. Barrett. I have, I'm just seeing if he's in here, Mr. Dittman. He's here.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Is anyone else intending to speak from the council?
Not intending to speak, sir, but Sue Wilson is monitoring the channels and the teams and the YouTube and everything to make sure everything goes okay there.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you to the council for putting everything in place for the virtual hearings. I have next on my list Dr. Doggett. Your system's clearly working, so I don't need to ask that. I have Mr. Austin Fell.
Well, good afternoon, sir. Here.
Thank you. I have Michael Davies.
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Thank you. I have Catherine Bentham. I'm sure I saw you here. Maybe that you're on mute. I can see
Yes, I'm here, sir. Sorry.
Brilliant.
Put itself back on mute.
Yeah, no, it does that. Well, that's exactly in line with the instructions. So thank you for clarifying that you're here and can hear. David Hodgetts, is it just you as it was in the previous session?
Hi, sir. Yes, I'm here, and that is correct. It's just me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I then have Doug Han from WSP, but that is just that's just now David Hodgetts, correct?
That's correct, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Thank you. I have Neil Cox.
Present, sir.
Thank you. And Catherine O'Toole.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Victoria Lane.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sian Griffiths.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Thank you, Sian. Matt Evans. He may not be here. He wasn't here this morning. Okay. Mark Rose.
Yes, sir.
Mark Sitch.
Good afternoon, sir. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger Tustin.
Yes, sir. I'm
Have
here.
I pronounced that right?
Tustain, sir.
Tustain. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Tustain. Councillor Chambers.
Here, sir, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Winter, Mr. John Winter.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Thank you. And I have James Westley, who wasn't in the session this morning. Mr. Westley, are you here now? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Anyone here that I haven't read out? Okay. So, if we turn to paragraph 27 of INSP 5B, so I've put in there some background about the progress of the examination to date, in particular the examination documents which have looked at infrastructure provision AD 5A, AD 47. Now, as I have it, Appendix A to NWBC 26, which is quite a recent document in the examination process, sets out a fresh infrastructure table of projects considered either critical or important to facilitate the development that's proposed by the plan. And this all ties back to one of the requirements for a plan is that it's deliverable. And that document, Appendix A of NWBC 26, is particularly relevant in terms of upgrades to the A5. Those were detailed in to some extent in my letter INSP 20. And previously, there were various different terms used to describe whether infrastructure was critical, necessary, desired, etc. And some lack of clarity, if I can call it that, between what was shown in the infrastructure delivery plan and the strategic transport assessment. So my pithily phrased question is the funding, phasing and geographic relationship of infrastructure provision relative to meeting development requirements clearly set out and robust? Should greater specificity be set out in the plan for effectiveness to enable suitable monitoring? So I thought that's quite a mouthful, but as a start, could I ask the council to talk us all through Appendix A to NWBC 26, and particularly what it says is critical or important, just so we're absolutely clear as to how the plan now proposes that infrastructure goes in line with delivery of houses and employment land. That would be very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, as you will see on the Appendix A, sir, there is a new column which says planning strategy and then importance to the strategy. And that's what the important and critical relates to, because it's the A5 improvements are seen as being critical to the delivery of the overall planning strategy. And so it's not saying that none of the rest of the infrastructure isn't important site by site, but it's in relation to the overall planning strategy. And so that's one of the differences between the infrastructure delivery plan as we've currently got that was submitted with the plan and this piece in this document there, is that I think the question in the discussion was, well, what is actually critical to the overall strategy of the local plan? And so that's why we've said that what is listed is important to the strategy, but what's absolutely critical is the delivery of the A5.
Okay, thank you. Now, could you talk me through the funding so I know there are a number of elements to the A5 project, and I'm very mindful that some people want to comment on the sort of geography of the A5 projects as to what has been funded and what has not. But I think it'd be very useful to talk me through specifically what the projects for which funding has been secured. What is proposed, I believe it's Road Infrastructure Strategy 3 funding, what is proposed to be included in that respect, and what the Highways England DFT, what that statement of common ground says in relation to the sort of the funding issues.
Okay. In terms of the A5, the Strategic Transport Assessment divided the works along the A5 into 4 phases. Phases 1 and 2 are the 2 phases that have got the funding from that was announced in the budget in 2020 and has now got the funding that's been all agreed, and that's for £79.5 million. And that's what the Statement of Common Ground actually relates to. So the third and fourth phases are what the commitment has been given to in the regional investment strategies for, so it's RIS3, RIS3, and that is what the commitment is, that will be developed into other projects for the Grendon bypass, which is phase 3. So that would be north of Grendon and north of where the reserve housing site is. So that would be north of, well, it would be part of that reserve housing site. And then it would also be phase 4, which is from Manchester all the way up to Myra. So the funding today is for phases 1 and 2.
Thank you. So if you could just, and this is for my benefit, if we're looking at the infrastructure table in that Appendix A, improvement, so we've got various rows. Row 2, improvements to the A5, and row 3, improvements to Island at Holly Lane. Those are phases 1 and 2, as they were in the strategic transport assessment, which have been, for which funding has been secured to the tune of 79.5 million. And there are, yeah, no, I saw the nod. Phases 3 and 4. What rows are they on the infrastructure table in Appendix A? Or do they not feature in there?
They're not actually listed in that one. That would, no, they're not listed.
Okay, and can you just briefly explain the, and I have seen various comments about this through the additional local plan consultation, but can you just briefly explain the geography of phases 1 and 2 and the geography of phases 3 and 4 in terms of the A5?
Okay, the phase 1 and 2, if I can do it in two sections, it would be from Long Street Junction in Dordon. There's a roundabout currently there at the moment. So a dualling would be carried on south of of Dordon, south of the current A5, and would rejoin the A5 just before Grendon. And at the moment, that looks as if that will be a roundabout of some sort. So then that would rejoin onto the old A5 currently, going through Grendon. Then as we go along to the Holly Lane, just before you get there, you go over a rise, and that is currently dual carriageway. Well, the dual carriageway would be continued towards the roundabout on each of the approaches on the A5, and then the roundabout itself would be signalised as well.
Thank you. And is there a map of that? Is that in the strategic transport assessment?
There is a small scale map in AD 47, but that's about the best map that we've got at the moment, because I know local councillors have asked for, but that's about the best that we've got at the moment.
Okay, let me just take a brief look at that. 2 seconds.
Sure, it's that one.
Yeah, it's the I can see the A5 dualling summary note, and okay. Can I just may I just share my screen with you, and you can point out. So if I share that, we've got that. So we've got the dualling Grendon to Atherstone. There's the HIF scheme, which is there. Are we talking basically Holly Lane to the Dordon roundabout? Is that phases 1 and 2?
No, sir, it excludes that bump northwards around Grendon.
This?
Yes, it excludes that. So it includes the HIF bit to the right of your that bit there. Mm-hmm. And then it includes from where the bump rejoins the A5 to the, that's it, that section there up to the Holly Lane roundabout. It includes that section.
Okay, thank you. And so the purple line is what is proposed to be funded under RIS 3 then?
Yes, sir. And that's also in relation to the reserve housing site is to that area. That would be the area in blue.
Is that RH1 from memory?
It is, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I know I have seen Mr. Sorry, let me just take my screen off. I know I've seen Mr. Winter, your hand up, but before I do, can I just be absolutely clear about timing? So the phase 1 and 2 has of the A5 has, as you say, that commitment in the budget to 79.5 million, which I believe was more than the 58 million that was indicatively thought for that project. I seem to remember a figure of 58 million. I'm just, and I'm not, I'm not questioning that at all. I'm just purely, I have a figure of 58 million in memory from what we discussed. I see 79.5 million. I wonder if there's more in that project now than there was, or if simply it's a different calculation of cost.
It's a very strange system, sir, but with it being a Highways England road, as I understand it, they have to pay a VAT on it. And the 58 was when the county council was going to be delivering it, but now it's Highways England that will be delivering it on their strategic road network. So, yeah. So effectively, there's nothing more in substance in that project than phases 1 and 2. Okay, and so that that funding is in place. Is there an intended start and finish date for that? Yes, so in terms of the funding, it's shown in 3.6 of the Statement of Common Ground But the funding for has been transferred to the DFT in the autumn of 2020. The contracts they're looking to be signed in 2021. As far as I'm aware, that's ongoing discussions for those contracts to be signed, with a start on site in 2026. And then the road would be opened in March 2028.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm just going to, just so that I've got it handy, I'm just going to go back to the proposed stepped housing trajectory, which I see. So works will start in 2026, which is when there is step 3, it looks like, in terms of the option 2, roughly when the housing figure, the housing proposed housing requirement would annual requirement would step up quite considerably. Okay, I've got that. That's very helpful. And now, just before I come to Mr. Winter, who's been waiting very patiently, can I check the timings in terms of I want to say road infrastructure scheme, but is it regional infrastructure? RIS 3, let's call it RIS 3. What's the timing of that process?
The timing is that, as far as I'm aware, sir, is that the projects are being developed and worked up, and there's work being done by Midlands Connect at the moment and Highways England, and that the funding for those schemes, so they would be expected to start on site in 2030, because it would be 30 to 35 would be the funding stream. However, all that I can say is that in terms of all of this, the funding has come from a totally different source to where we expected it from, and there seems to be an awful lot of commitment to actually see those improvements being taken place.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to ask one more question. That's very clear, thank you, in terms of setting that out. If I can just, and I know I said it, that no one should share screens, and I'm breaking my own rule, but well, there we are. If I can just share this screen again. So we talked about how phases 1 and 2, and this purple section being the subject of RIS 3. I know a number of people are concerned about what happens to that stretch in the interim. Where would I go to find, say, the implications of the additional traffic resulting from the site allocations and the plans proposal on that section? Presumably that would be in the strategic transport assessment.
Yes, sir, that's where I would point you to.
And I'm putting you on the spot, but what does that say for that section? I mean, just if it's there in your mind in terms of capacity, you know, design capacity, ratios of flow to capacity, that sort of thing. If that, so what I'm hearing is that the RIS 3 funding, if that comes online, that element of the project will be undertaken around 2030 onwards. In the meantime, there are other things happening either side of that section. But in terms of the level of growth that is forecast through the plan, how does that affect that section in terms of capacity during the plan period?
I think the whole of the A5, sir, has got the capacity issues, and that's why it's been important to actually get a local plan that's got the housing in order to be able to deliver the infrastructure, because without the housing, we wouldn't have secured the money to get the improvements that we've already got in place. So again, it's that delivery of additional housing again to improve the next sections of it. So it's not ideal, and particularly that section is just a two-way road. I mean, I am hopeful that that is a short-lived issue, but we've had this particular issue now for a number of years, and it isn't the best solution that we haven't got the funding for all of the A5, but we've come a long way from where we were, where we had no funding and no prospect of getting the improvements. So it's not ideal, and I do take that on board. But we will be working tirelessly to make sure that we get those additional improvements in place as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you. And I think if and I presume now we're going to hear from some other. That's a very thank you. That's a very helpful explanation of geographies, timing, funding, etc. That's really helpful. And we're going to hear from some other people, I'm sure now. But if in the meantime it would be possible, if I could ask the council to look at the strategic transport assessment and see and point me to specific things that look at that stretch of the A5, what will occur there during the plan period in the absence of upgrades. That will be extremely helpful. And usually, in my experience, that outcome is referred to in terms of ratio of flow to capacity of various junctions. So what the junctions are designed to deal with and what they would have to deal with in terms of vehicular movements. That would be really helpful if that is possible. Just so I'm aware of the relevant evidence there in terms of delivery and also the elements of the NPPF in terms of transport and traffic implications. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. We'll look into that and get a reference to you.
Thank you very much. And I'll put that on my list of actions. Okay. Now, first hand up was Mr. Winter. So we are still on section, just to make sure we're all clear, we're still on paragraph 27 of INSP 5B about the clarity of infrastructure upgrades, specifically talking about the A5. Mr. Winter.
Thank you. When North Warwickshire first done the local plan, the main thing they said was the A5 was critical. But if they're doing it in stages, the houses will be built, and then if we don't get the other two stages, everybody north of the A5 is going to have a lot of problems trying to get out of the places.
Okay, so the critical importance of the A5, and I believe in using that word critical, you're referring back to some of the previous infrastructure studies.
Yes.
That use slightly different terms to describe it, but I take that point. I will. I'll take a few more hands, and then we'll ask the council on that. So thank you, Mr. Winter. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, sir. I want to pick up the questions that quite rightly you're addressing in terms of the strategic transport assessment and the question that you pose in these hearings of, is this phasing and funding robust enough to enable the local plan to be judged sound? And if I could just refer you to paragraph 5.89 of the strategic assessment, there was an analysis of impacts which showed that the A5 Spon Lane Boot Hill junction and two junctions would show a very severe increase to the west of the M42. There is also another section in the strategic transport assessment which says it is considered that the full bypass identified within the final phase of the assessment is likely to be critical in enabling the full housing and employment sites to be delivered, which is estimated to be 57.5 million. That's in addition to the 58 million that was there originally. Now, clearly, if only part, and you can see from the map that you showed, it is only a small section, that amber section in the map is done, what is going to happen around that roundabout, and indeed around the rest of that single part of the A5 through which and alongside which many people live, is that you're going to get stopping and starting of thousands and thousands of heavy goods vehicles, air pollution rising, and I think in your original letter you did say that, I'll quote INSP 18, that a significant amount of development proposed in the plan relies on the implementation of those improvements, and also, and this is the important bit from our point of view, and also on A5 dualling to the north of Grendon, forecast at around 57.5 million. Now, the question of funding through RIS3 and the kind of statement that's in the Statement of Common Ground, which I've only just had an opportunity to really have a look at, doesn't fill me with any real reassurance that this money is going to be committed for that stretch marked in purple, or that there's any guarantee when we get to that stage that I think it's C17 in the RIS3 pipeline will actually materialise. I don't know how many of the pipeline projects actually drop out before they get to being a firm commitment, but there is a genuine risk that this section of the A5 will not actually materialise, and all that's stated in that pipeline is just A5 Hinckley to Tamworth. So until all the design and delivery mechanisms and the growth arrangements and the funding is committed for RIS3, unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to get enormous congestion all the way from junction 10 right through to Atherstone as a result of these housing developments upon which the spine of the A5 critically depend. I also have concerns in terms of the robustness about Highways England's capacity to deliver on this, particularly as I understand they are now in the lead for delivering on this infrastructure project. That may not be of concern to you, but if you look at their record in terms of slippage, underspend, and so on, I think we're going to have, in terms of the trajectories, and I do note that the target milestones only start in 2026. They do not, as the Table A suggests, start and be completed by 2026. The delivery point is 2028. And then after that, there is a period of about 5 to 6 years where we will simply not know whether or not the rest of the A5 developments are going to take place. So I am very concerned about the quality of life for people in that part. And I think I've made my views clear, so I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was a helpful reference in particular to paragraph 5.89 of the Strategic Transport Assessment. Now, can I take those points and ask the council that 5.89, as Councillor Chambers has said, that there would be a very severe increase at certain elements of the A5. Can I just check that is because the names of certain projects, as we've discussed, or the phases have changed? Can I just check that is that the case? I don't want to ask a leading question. Is that the case without phases 3 and 4? So 5.89 of the Strategic Transport Assessment.
I haven't got the Strategic Transport Assessment just in front of me, sir, but the one thing that I would like to say is that the A5 is a regional road. It is part of the strategic road network. Traffic is increasing on it anyway. So any increase issues are going to happen on that A5, even without the housing at the moment in North Warwickshire. I know it's in phases, but that housing is allowing us to draw in the funds to make sure that the A5 can be improved. Without, it's like a chicken and egg. Without the development, we're not getting the support to actually get the funding for the road improvements. But even if we had no development in North Warwickshire, the A5 is going to get worse because of the amount of growth that's happening beyond the borough boundaries. So it is an issue, yes, that that every time you improve a part of a road, you move the problem slightly further along the road, and it's a transport planner's nightmare, I suppose, in terms of that it just moves an issue. If you increase the capacity in one element, but you're not increasing the next part of it until that next part has been done. But the problem that we have in this country is that we don't have a long forward funded programme of transport schemes. Everything is in these 5-yearly blocks, and it is very frustrating for a borough council not to be able to say, here is all the funding to do the whole of the A5 at one time, and this will deliver absolutely everything, because that's our preferred route. But the only thing that I would say is that even now we'll be looking to see how we can get those other improvements done as quickly as we possibly can. And there is Midlands Connect have been doing studies as well, because they want to improve the whole from the Tamworth to Hinckley section. So that would come in a broader strategy as well. So there's other means as well that we're trying to push for those improvements to come forward a lot quicker than what it appears to be at the moment. But for the delivery of certain sites, yes, we've got the phases 1 and 2 and the funding for it. And unfortunately, the consequence is that for a limited time period, there may be then issues that go on to the next section of the road. And at the moment, I just don't have a solution to that.
Sure.
So,
no, I understand that. I think as the first point of clarification, that's, I completely understand your points there. I think the first point of clarity, though, would be to just check if you can, as you said you would do previously, what the implications are for that stretch of road without those upgrades. So the ones that are funded with RIS3 or proposed to be funded via RIS3. So whether effectively section 5.89 does say that there will be very severe increases, and then I will obviously consider what that means in practice. I take the point that plans must be aspirational but deliverable, and therefore there's an element of judgment as to if things are proposed to be funded, if there is support for those. That judgment effectively falls on me as to whether that is sufficient to meet that criteria. So I can certainly hear the argument. So thank you for that. But yes, if you could clarify what are the implications. I mean, perhaps saying more than I should, but if there are going to be significant implications, effectively, that the traffic along the A5, which, as you said, is a strategic road, are going to be gummed up by pursuing a high housing requirement, then that is exactly what we're talking about feeding into a step trajectory, whether that can effectively be mitigated to some extent by ensuring that the phasing of development aligns with it. So that's exactly what we're here to talk about. So thank you for those clarifications. Now let me come to, I think, Mr. Winter. So I will go Mr. Winter, Dr. Doggett, Councillor Chambers, and then Mr. Austin Fell. Those are the hands I see up at the moment. So Mr. Winter first.
Thank you. I wonder if through you I could ask Dorothy Borrett to send us a hard copy of the map of the A5, what you just shown.
If that is, I mean, I will leave that over to the council, but if that is what I just shared, that is That is there publicly, and I can't personally see a problem with that, but I'll leave that over to the council. Are you okay to take that away? Okay.
Yes, we'll sort that out.
Okay, thank you.
And one other thing is the island at Long Street in Dordon is not fit for purpose now, let alone later.
Okay, I have just to say that when the world was slightly more normal about a year or so ago, I have undertaken quite an extensive visit of the areas. So and I have driven around Dordon in particular. So thank you for that. Dr. Doggett.
Thank you, sir. Yes. No. I just wanted to add to what people have said. I suppose I feel that the likelihood of phase 1 and 2, just between Dordon and Grendon, improving capacity is likely to be very small, because there's a roundabout at each end, and both those roundabouts will continue to be pinch points. And particularly now that we're discovering that phases 3 and 4 are not to be delivered until 2035, which is outside the length of the plan. The plan is supposed to go up to 2033. So that second phase is not going to be there till all the houses have been built. Obviously, Jackie Chambers, we mentioned your document 18, but in 19 you said the implementation of the plan strategy is dependent on highway improvements, I believe. And the NPPF, you asked us to notes that plans should be deliverable over its period. But if the period for the plan is to 2033 for all the houses on the trajectory, and phases 3 and 4 are not going to be there till 2035, it seems very difficult to see how it is deliverable, because the improvement in capacity must be of just phases 1 and 2 must be very limited, because a chain is always weakest at its weakest link, or a pipe is going to be slow if there's a blockage somewhere. And with roundabouts at each end and then a single carriageway road to the east, it's difficult to see how much significant increase in capacity phases 1 and 2 during the period of the plan will give. And the other phases are outside the period of the plan for all those houses.
Thank you. Yes, no, I take those points, and I think this was something that was raised in earlier sessions, that there was, based on the strategic transport assessment, there was modelling of the road that pointed up to a certain level. It functions appropriately. Beyond a certain level, that doesn't that doesn't occur, notwithstanding people's points about how particular elements of the road network function at present, which I take on board. So I think that the first port of call is for the council to clarify exactly what happens to that element of the A5 in the absence of those phases 3 and 4 for the duration of the plan period, and what effect that has on the road network based on the evidence. The council is going to take that away and come back to me. But I'd like to come to Councillor Chambers now on that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It's just a couple of very quick points. Just to point out that the Grendon area has got, I think, 3,500 houses just in that particular patch around the purple part. And I once added up how many houses depend in North Warwickshire, new houses depend on the A5 infrastructure being improved, and I think it's about 7,500 of the total. On top of that, you've got another 100,000 in total. The A5 corridor study projected were going to be built along the A5, and some of those weren't taken into account in the strategic transport assessment. I just want to ask the council, if I may, if the money is actually transferred across, so it's now secure, or is there any risk that that the money won't come across, given that we've got this economic crisis and COVID looming? That's the first question. And the second question is, in terms of the trajectories and the phasing that's in this statement of common ground, I don't think my point about 2026 completion by 2028 and what was in table A or the critical infrastructure plan table that you talked about, whether that was properly addressed and answered.
Okay, thank you. So I will, and I see there are other, and I did say I get to Mr. Ostenfeld, and I see Mr. Tustain's hand is up as well, so I will come to you. But that I think there were 2 points there, if I can ask the council on that. The relationship of the step trajectory to the phasing of phases 1 and 2, and the as I heard it, the broader implications for housing dependent or other development dependent on the A5, not just limited to the borough.
Okay, in terms of I'm sorry, Sam, I've gone completely blank into.
No, not at all.
I do apologise.
No. That's absolutely fine. No, it happens to me as well, and I just bumble through my notes, so I wouldn't want. But the first.
Sir, could I come in on this one, sir?
Yeah, of course you can.
Sorry, sir. I was holding my fire, and I wasn't so sure because I didn't want to get in the way of County Chamber or Mr. Winter. Just to clarify on the strategic transport assessment, the transport assessment is assessed on 3 scenarios: do nothing, do minimum, do something. Paragraph 5.69, if you look at that section, clarifies this. The section, obviously, that Councillor Chambers was referring to was the do minimum. And yes, there is a severe impact if you do minimum. If you look on to paragraph 596, where the assessment says do something, which is addressing the issue through the infrastructure improvements, then you will notice the Grendon roundabout loses the severe category. That's part of the catch-22 we're in. Given the circumstances, we are faced with increased developments east and west of the A5, because we have significant potential pressures in Tamworth, Lichfield, ongoing pressures in Nuneaton, Bedworth and Hinckley, increased off-site pressures from a rail freight transport centre, and significant logistics east of the M69 junction 2 on the M69, and a further increase in logistics for, I think it is Land Rover at junction 11 on the M42. There is very little way out of avoiding impacts on this stretch of the A5, being the key link, as Councillor Chambers noted, between junction 10 and the M69. So to deliver some of the improvements is the route we're going, but to do that we have had to accommodate development. If you do not accommodate the development, you do not get the improvements, unfortunately, because they are almost predicated that the government will deliver help if you can deliver something back for them. And in this case, it is housing, because of the housing need. If we do nothing, you will still get those severe implications because the pressure is there. Now, it is not a panacea, as Dorothy Barrett said. Inevitably, we are trying to make the best of a bad world. So to get some level of infrastructure improvements that we all accept are significant and needed on this stretch, that's the route we have gone. If we stick with a do minimum or do nothing, we will still face at least a severe or a bad difficulty on many of these junctions. At least if we, as assessed through the STA, do something, we are going some way, although it's not perfect, we are going some way to addressing the critical issues. And if at the same time, which is where the devil's agreement has been made with the government, the only way of achieving that is by being willing to accommodate greater housing growth and accepting and accommodating the shortfalls need in our adjoining neighbours, which we are required to consider through the duty to cooperate. That is what we have done. I can't see any way out of it. If we don't do that, it will either be forced on us through planning appeal anyway, and without the ability to access infrastructure, or we will be faced by accommodating even more growth at a later stage when the shortfalls continue to increase, because we are aware the Greater Birmingham area are looking at significant shortfalls post 2031. And that is, I think, referred to in the GBHMA comment, for instance, on the HHP. So something has to be done. The STA is looking at those options and has assessed it, as I said, on the do nothing, do minimum and do something basis. And yes, I don't disagree. There are significant implications if we do minimum, but the proposals are about doing something, and that's where we're trying to do. So if you look at 5.69 and the map on there under the do something, you will note the level of impact on those junctions is lessened, although it's still there.
Thank you, and that's there's some helpful points. 5.96 of the STA, as you say, is the do something scenario. Now, is that do something scenario, and I'm sorry to ask, is that do something scenario simply phases 1 and 2 of the A45, the upgrades, the A5 upgrades, or does it encompass more things? I just want to be absolutely clear on the basis for those assessments. So that do something scenario in STA, paragraph 5.96, is that simply phases 1 and 2, or is it phases 1, 2, 3 and 4?
I'm not 100% sure. I'm assuming it's phases 1 and 2, but it also incorporates some wider improvements. If you look at the plan, there's a number of improvements, for instance, on the B5000, on the Holly Lane roundabouts, and the former bridge. Well, it's not former, it's the existing bridge through to Aldi. So there are some additional improvements over and above the HIF bid, or what is now the CLG bid, and there is 2 projections. So I would have to go into a little bit more detail just to confirm, but that was my understanding. It's that plus, it's those 2 phases plus additional improvements, which we do have to address, and which I'm assuming, I know Councillor Chambers is aware, but I know others are aware. And much of those improvements were to be delivered directly through the County Council and under their responsibility as a highway authority, and addressed through by contributory Section 106 contributions as well. But to get those improvements, again, we're in this catch-22 situation. You have to get the development to get the contribution.
I see that. I think then, if I may clarify my request for clarification of the council. So it would be, yes, first and foremost, to set out or to clarify exactly what happens to the central section, if I can call it that, of the A5 with phases 1 and 2 of the infrastructure upgrades done, but not phases 3 and 4, and whether 5.96, the do something scenario, is simply phases 1 and 2 or more. Now, if it is more, I would suggest that the infrastructure table in Appendix A should refer to those more bits and pieces as critical, as well, as it seems like in what you've just said, Mr. Dittman, they are in fact critical to mitigating adverse effects on the A5. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir, I think that's fair. I will have a look with Dorothy on that, and just to make sure if we can fit those and include those under the critical part of Appendix A in the NWBC 26 response. But I will chase that up for you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I know we're going to talk. I know I've got Mr. Ostenfeld and Mr. Tustain on this. I'm just trying to think about where we could consider that, as I think it would be unfair to ask you to do that in proceedings here and now. So let's chalk that up. If we may, can we put that under paragraph 56 of INSP 5B? So that would be the morning session of Thursday, to consider that, because it is relevant to allocations and we're dealing with allocations of paragraph 56. Could I ask that we discuss it then?
I think that's all right, sir. Yes, I'm just getting the nod from Dorothy.
Okay, I'll make a very quick note of that. I believe it was. Can I hear from Mr. Austin Fell now, and then Mr. Tustain?
Yes, thank you, sir. I have little more to add than the suggestions that you've just echoed. I think at the moment we're left in a position where we need a lot more clarity on the relationship of the A5 upgrades to the committed projects before we can take an informed view here. Just dwelling for a second on Mr. Dittman's comments, I fully agree that a do something scenario is needed. Clearly, that these sections of the A5 are constrained as they stand. However, the question is not an if, but it is a when. And quite sort of simply, we need greater confidence in the ability to understand when the phases of the HIF funding will be spent and how that relates to the delivery of the respective housing schemes, because ultimately we want to ensure that what is developed does not lead to significant adverse impacts in the short term. Turning to what we've got in terms of the evidence base for the A5 so far, I'm a little bit conflicted because we have document AD47, which we referred to previously, figure 1, where we have the map. I'm conflicted, sir, because our client site on Tamworth Road is actually included erroneously as a housing allocation. We're an emission site. I probably shouldn't raise that. I should take it on the nose and say we're in. But what this sort of indicates to me is that we have very little substance to sort of go on. We have AD47, we have the very recently signed Statement of Common Ground, which I see was countersigned on the 2nd of December. This acknowledges that, yes, there is agreement between parties, but there still is very much lacking the funding arrangements and the conditions needed to ensure that the A5 is delivered with certainty. That is reflected as part of paragraph 3.5 for your reference. We also have, as you know, reference to NWBC 26 Appendix A. All in all, we have very little evidence to go on. I myself am not available for Thursday's session, though. I would welcome some sort of dispensation to review that sort of separately if you consider that is acceptable. Because ultimately, sir, we've already mentioned the need for plans to be aspirational and deliverable, but as you'll be very much aware, in line with 182, we need to ensure that plans can be justified and effective in order to be found sound. And just echoing the comments that I reflected upon earlier, I'm very concerned that whilst a number of the sites in the plan proposed in the later phases will come forward, I'm concerned they won't come forward at the rate the council are expecting. And my concerns sort of relate to the potential for a big shortfall in the middle period of the plan, where delivery and the funding requirements just simply do not align. So I think I'll have to wait for the council to come back with more details, sir. But just to come back on my earlier point, that I think there needs to be some sort of buffer mechanism to ensure that the plan does not fail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And as to I think, and I'm sorry to hear you're not available on Thursday, but I think as to kind of what further opportunity there'll be for comment, I will just have to take a view in the round when we get there. But I clearly want to make sure that everyone feels like they've had a suitable opportunity, and clearly, ultimately, when any main modifications go out for consultation, there'll be the opportunity then. I'm not saying there won't be other opportunities, but I will need to think about that in the round. Before I come to you, Mrs. Barrett, let me go to Mr. Tustain, who's been waiting for a little while, and then I'll bundle up those points and come to you. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Just for clarity, I represent the landowners at R1, which is Dairy House Farm Phase 3, which the bypass falls within. So that just gives you the context of where I'm coming from. And just a quick point I want to make here is the timing for RIS 3. We've had some initial discussions with the County Council, and I think Mrs. Barrett made the point that the RIS 3 programme identifies schemes that start in 2030. From my discussions with the County Council, the funding for RIS 3 is announced in 2025. So there's a lot of technical work and bid work that the current RIS 2 programme provides a funding mechanism to do the background technical work and business cases for the RIS 3 bids, but they're announced in 2025. So that's the funding timescales for the availability of money. Now, clearly, which is germane to my overall point, is that the success of funding does depend to a degree on is it delivering additional housing? And in addition to that, is there developer funding that can be put towards any funding bids? So all I'm saying is that in relation to R1, and we'll come on to this point a bit later on, but the fact that there's no certainty that R1 is going to come forward within the context of this local plan could potentially, in my view, prejudice to a degree any funding for the Phase 3, which is the Grendon bypass. But notwithstanding that, we should be in a position in 2025 to understand what the RIS funding is. And in addition to that, of course, RIS funding is only one source of funding for highway schemes. There are a whole host of other government funding sources which are used to fund necessary infrastructure. So we focused on RIS funding and the timescales for that, but there are other sources such as HIF funding that have been successfully sought throughout the country on schemes that deliver housing development or help deliver housing. So that's just a point I want to make at this point, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. That's yeah, that's very clear. And as you say, I think the point about the trigger for reserve sites is somewhere there in the future, as is some discussion on reserve sites. So thank you. I've made a detailed note of that for when we get there, and thank you for the clarification in terms of RIS 3 funding, some announcement potentially in 2025 and other sources of funding. So may I put those points to the council in terms of the sort of the clarity of the evidence around the A5 and timings?
I think in terms of the statement of common ground, sir, that you have before you, I mean, the commitment has been shown by a number of organisations there: Midlands Connect, the Department of Transport, Warwickshire County Council, Highways England. It's also that there is the MHCLG is involved in it as well, because that is where the funding is actually come from. And as you'll see, there is the commitment that the Warwickshire County Council has to do under 3.4 of that statement, because they're responsible for reporting on the housing delivery. So housing delivery is a very key part of the funding part of getting the improvements to the A5. So I think issues of certainty, I'm not sure how much certain I can be other than having a check in front of me to say that it's here. But to have a Deputy Director of the Department of Transport to sign it, I think is fairly synonymous to show that there is a very strong commitment here that this scheme will be delivered. So I think from that point of view, the first two phases, yes, they've got the funding, but equally, as Mr. Tustain says, there is alternative sources of funding. It's been highlighted in the budget that RIS 3 is the mechanism, but previously we thought that HIF was going to be the funding mechanism for this road, but that hasn't come and it's actually coming out of the MHCLG's own budgets. So there are other means in which this is available to be funded. I do agree, though, that in terms of perhaps the triggers for the reserve sites, so we can talk about that when we come to that. So there may be some modifications that we can talk about there that may help in that regard, if that's an issue that can help to bring that forward. I think that was all that I wanted to say at the moment, sir.
Thank you. That's all very clear. Thank you. And I think I'm sort of getting towards saturation point in my mind in terms of understanding the differences. So I would like to move on to point 28, which is in a minute, which is more about the trajectory and deliverability of certain sites, and whether in general the kind of the assumptions that have been plugged into that in terms of market delivery. And I believe someone previously mentioned the sort of market's ability to absorb the levels of development, that sort of thing, more so than infrastructure. But I will just quickly hear from the people who have their hands up, which is Mr. Austenfell, Councillor Chambers. I believe that's all I can see. So Mr. Austenfell.
Apologies, sir. That was an erroneous hand. I'll bring it down now. Thank you.
Absolutely shocking. No, that's that happens from time to time. Councillor Chambers.
Yes, just quickly, sir. It was in relation to this statement of common ground, which, as your previous speakers have said, we've only just had a time to have a look at, and certainly as councillors we haven't had an opportunity to comment on whether we think that is a robust enough agreement to oversee what is obviously going to be quite a complex process of governance and delivery and implementation. When I looked at it, I didn't see anything that referred to the role of the Borough Council in relation to this or what the governance arrangements were going to be. But if that is the only thing that we've got now, apart from that map, that crude map, which has been around for 18 months, to go on, I do think you may not do this sort of thing, but some kind of comment on whether you think this statement of common ground is a sufficiently robust statement of commitment will work and hold us as parties to make this happen, because I fear, from the reputation certainly of Highways England in the past, that the deliverability on their side, the commitment to actually see this through and work with all the partners, I very much have my worries about that. And if this is the only vehicle, if you like, that's going to hold people to the table and hands to the fire, as it were, I doubt whether it's robust enough.
Okay, thank you. I've certainly taken account of those points and note your perspective on Highways England work. Clearly, I can't comment on that, but I will turn to Mr. Sitch and then get some final comments from the council, and then we'll move on to paragraph 28 of INSP 5B and talk about sort of market delivery. So, Mr. Sitch.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. It's Mark Sitch for the Commissioners for England in respect of the Polesworth and Dordon site. Actually, I had my hand up before Councillor Chambers commented, but I took it down again after your point. I think you've heard enough. But
sorry.
Could I? No, not at all, sir. I think I was only going to echo Ms. Barrett's comments, really, and I think really just reinforce, I think, the weight that we can attach to the statement of common ground that you have, given who that statement of common ground is signed by. This isn't a statement of common ground between the council and a neighbouring authority or even the local highway authority. It's obviously with the Department of Transport, and as Ms. Barrett says, is actually signed by the Deputy Director of the Department of Transport. It's also signed by, clearly, the County Highway Authority, Midlands Connect, but equally the delivery partner, Highways England. And I think the weight and the importance of the A5 was set out to you previously in the first hearings and is reconfirmed in the statement of common ground. So I think you can take a lot of comfort and attach a lot of weight to this statement of common ground and the work that's been done since the announcement of the funding in March, and obviously in terms of the time frame that's set out in that statement of common ground, which flows from AD 47, which flows from the STA, and they're all relevant pieces of evidence that inform that statement of common ground you now have. So in respect of your question 27. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, the points clearly made, and two sides of the coin there. So thank you. Now, turning to the council, any comments before? I'd probably like to take a little break before we move on to paragraph 28. Any comments at this stage?
I think the only comment that I'd like to make, sir, is that the statement of common ground is for the purposes for this examination. It isn't the contract of works or anything else. It is a statement of common ground between all the relevant parties to give you the confidence that the funding is there, the contracts will be sorted, and everything else. So I'd just like to reiterate that.
Thank you. Okay, unless that's very clear. Unless there are any other points, I suggest we adjourn and we come back at 20 to 4, when we will be talking more, because we've dealt with the A5, but we'll be coming back to it in terms of the clarification from the council on Thursday morning. So just you might want to, if you do intend and you hadn't previously chalked your name up against coming on Thursday morning, it would be very helpful for me if you could let Kerry Truman, the program officer, know. That would be very useful. I would then, when we come back at 20 to 4, I'd like to look at question 28 insofar as it relates to the assumptions in terms of delivery, build-out rates, market circumstances. And I've put, as I usually do, some of the background there and some of the disputes that have been raised in terms of the assumptions that have been plugged into those figures. So that's what I'd like to return to. If I could ask, so I'll adjourn the hearing. If I could ask people just to mute and turn their videos off. It looks like you've all done that, and we'll come back. We'll restart at 20 to 4. So thank you. Okay, let's reconvene, having adjourned about 20 minutes ago. I hope we are all there. Looks like we are, and the recording has been started. Good. So we are now on paragraph 28 of INSP 5B. I'm hoping to finish around 5, although we might go on a little bit later, just looking at the points left to cover. I would like to, just before we end today, I have kept a note of the actions and the points for follow-up, which I would like to just read through, just for clarity with the council, so that we make sure we know where we're going and what we've got scheduled in the future. So we'll do that at the end. But out of style, perhaps, I'm going to just flag up in relation to paragraph 28 that Mr. Dittman referred earlier to NWBC 26C, which, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the latest situation in terms of all the sites that the council has either granted permission for or have had permission granted in some form or another, and all the allocations, and that sets out their anticipated delivery over the plan period. It would be very useful if there are any disputes in terms of what that shows, that you refer me very specifically to the point there. I was just reflecting on the, in the break, I was looking at the additional consultation responses in September, October, and there is still this thorny issue that if you look at national trends, there is the potential that the delivery trajectory that is there in NWBC 26C is potentially over-optimistic. So I'm not going to speak too much to that. I have indicated potential people who may want to, but does anyone want to speak to that? Otherwise, as I mentioned at the introduction, I have a lot of information before me, and I can be guided by that in reaching a view. Now, Mr. Cox, your hand went up and then went down. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, sir. Just, I'll be brief on this because I know you're short for time today. I think in relation to my client, Richborough Estates, our position is very similar to the one that we expressed through the Matter 9 hearing sessions. And I note that in INSP 18, you did ask the council to go away and provide some further evidence having regard to national trends. In respect of lead-in times and delivery rates. The council produced NWBC 24B Annex I, which was a list of sites that had come forward within the borough over the previous 4 or 5 years. And I think in INSP 20, you noted that there was a lack of large sites. And I think you made reference to 2 sites over 100 dwellings. Just looking at a bit more detail, Father Hudson's Coleshill for 113 dwellings, quite a large proportion of that was for a retirement living block. So I don't necessarily think that that is comparable to what's in the forward supply. And the other one was land south of Grendon Road, Polesworth for 150 dwellings, but actually only 68 were delivered on that site. So again, that would be under 100. So I think our view still remains that unfortunately the council doesn't have any local evidence to draw upon in terms of lead-in times and delivery rates. One thing I would just like to point out is that since Matter 9, the Lichfield start to finish report has been updated. There's a second edition. Yeah. And that's been included within our representations to the changes, and just really point out two figures that I think are relevant in that document. Figure 4, which is on page 6 of that document, sets out average lead-in times from validation to first delivery. And then figure 7 on page 9, which sets out the average build-out rates by size of sites.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And effectively, we've provided a bit of a comparison within representations.
Okay.
Using the Lichfield start to finish report.
Thank you. Yes, and I did see that updated report in your in your representation. So, thank you, Mr. Cox. Okay. Does anyone else want to speak to that? Otherwise, I will put those points to the council. We've got quite a bit, as Mr. Cox rightly said. We have quite a bit of history on this, toing and froing, requests for further information, clarity, and I believe that was the correct reference in INSP 20, where I suggested some more needed to be done by the council to arrive at a robust approach to delivery. Any other comments before I turn to the council? Okay, let me put that to Mrs. Barrett, Mr. Dittman, if you would like to comment on that. I suppose what I need to be satisfied is that the plan is deliverable, that the trajectories are robust and reasonably accurate.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick clarification. I did note Mr. Cox's comment regarding, I think it was the site south of Grendon Road, Polesworth. Just as a clarification, he mentioned 68. That site's, I think my last assessment was a minimum 143 dwellings. So there may be an element of dispute about how much he thinks has actually been delivered on that site. So we may need to clarify that.
Okay.
Just in brief, the summary table NWBC 26C, this is the list of planning applications that helps inform the trajectory. As much of the information as we could in delivering that, we obtained from the individual developers and individual applicants. So that is, for instance, where we had the issue with Barton Millmoor and H7 site, where we were made aware that, of course, a partial element of that would be delivered outside the plan period. And that's why I've included that document there with the various our interpretations of what the applicants have said, because they not all give us exact details, but general intentions in terms of time period. So that's where the trajectory helps come from. Also, in reference to Mr. Cox's submission, I think the latest version of the Lichfield document, and I think Dorothy will correct me if I'm wrong on this, this is the ALP 22 submission. We would contend that particularly H7, but the other sites are broadly reflective in terms of the average housing delivery to what Lichfield's latest report has put out. There are a number of sites, comparable sites, sort of 2,000 to 2,500 within that document that over the period that we're looking at for delivery of H7 would average around about 150 to 200 houses, or 189. I think we took a number of averages. I haven't got the document in front of me at the moment, but I can make reference to the sites we were referring to. One was in, I think, Warrington, but there were a number of other locations. So we believe we are not that out of step with that delivery numbers. I do understand their concerns regarding the market and issues like that. However, in terms of the evidence provided through that, I don't believe our larger strategic sites, the 1,500, 2,000 house sites, are that out of step with that national evidence. The difficulty, of course, we have as a borough is we haven't undertaken this level of growth in the past. The only comparisons we currently have locally are those at Weddington North, which is in Nuneaton and Bedworth, where they have been delivering an up to 4,000 plus house site on a number of locations, and you are looking at 6, maybe 8 developers in total, but at least 6 at more than one access point. So that isn't the nearest example, I would say, we have. Unfortunately, I don't have at this stage the actual delivery rate, so I can't give any more clarification on that. If I can pass this up to Dorothy, that would be
useful. Yeah, and if I may, I mean, this is more so I understand, I suppose, rather than anything that necessarily goes to soundness. But in the eventuality that delivery is not meeting those expectations, what sort of tools are available to you in that context? What would you do? And this is relevant potentially to reserve sites, but yeah, sorry, that sounds more like an interview question. It was just. It was just meant in terms of clarification. If that trajectory is faltering, are there options available to you in terms of how you maintain that?
Oh, one of the main ways, sir, is Mike. Can you switch yours off? Sorry, we're getting a bit of feedback there.
Sure.
In terms of the local plan, I mean, we'll be monitoring the situation every year. I mean, I suppose at one extreme, we have to review the plan anyway, under the NPPF within 5 years anyway. So we'll be constantly looking and making sure, but also the Borough Council will be working with the landowners to try and make sure that any barriers that are discovered after all the information that we have in front of us now, hopefully there won't be any barriers to the delivery of these sites. So I hope we've gone through enough of the evidence that we need to actually say that these sites will be delivered. They're actively being promoted. And in terms of the quote that Mike gave in relation to the Litchfields report, I'd probably direct you to Appendix 2 of that, and it gives a list of all various large sites around the country. And I think when you look at our trajectory, we say that there'll be 200, very quickly, I think 200 is the largest on any one site. It might be a smidge more on one of them. But as you'll see on those large sites table, some of those are delivering 400, 600 units a year. And if you take the average over the 9 years for, say, H7, if you averaged 1,700 houses out over those 9 years, it'd be 189 units a year. But we understand that particularly at the beginning of those sites, they tend to produce less. Then there's a big increase, and then it can come back down towards the end, or it can still remain at the higher level. So we've tried to make sure that those things are taken into account.
Thank you. And if and I will come to you, Mr. Cox, but that's a helpful explanation. If you could just take me in NWBC 26C to H7. In fact, I think I'm there. That looks like row 221, and I'm just looking at the trajectory there. Sorry, that's H17. It's 224. So row 224 of NWBC 26, we've got the delivery sort of tapering up, as you mentioned, Mrs. Barrett. I'm just trying to see what year that is. That's 2024, 2025. We've got their anticipated delivery of 100 homes. Next year after that, 175, then 200 onwards. So that, as I have it, is the latest in terms of what is anticipated for H7. But before I come back to Mr. Cox, that brings me on to my next point. Mr. Sitch, I hope has something to comment, and this isn't simply an error in the in my agenda, but I believe there was some issue about the consistency of those the anticipated delivery of H7 with what was proposed. Is that correct, Mr. Sitch? Can I?
Afternoon, sir. The the consistency point you raised, sir, in your next question, but appreciate related to this is, so I suppose in two respects. One is the 31 dwellings that arise in respect of the land south of the beaches, which the council have now included as a commitment. So you remove those 31 from our 1706, you get to the council's option 1 and option 2 figures of 1675, which we would agree with. So we're not inconsistent with that. The second potential inconsistency is between option 1 and option 2 that the council have put before you, which you referenced at NWBC 26C. They provided both of those options. The end result is still the same delivery of 1675 within the plan period. The remaining 325 coming forward of the 2000 allocation coming forward after that plan period, which isn't obviously has been accepted by other inspectors in that respect, and therefore it's the question around the relationship between option 1 and option 2.
Right.
Which the council put to you.
Okay. And NWBC 26 runs off option 2. Is that right?
I think it has both, sir, for you. So it has a start date of 2024-25, and then there's a following sheet which has a year later, which is the 25-26. But both of those are in the summary table at our appendix 5 of our representations to the council the 7th of October 2020. There's a summary table there, which is our proposed trajectory of the 26th of June 2020, put in context of what we had at the first hearings, and then it sets out the council's options 1 and 2. That's appendix 5.
So it's not the overall number of homes; it's the trajectory.
Yes, it's the one option 1 for the council is consistent with our 26th of June 2020 trajectory. Option 2 shows it starting a year later in terms of delivery.
Okay, thank you. Now, may I return to Mr. Cox?
I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right trajectory. So I know that Mrs. Barrett talked about an average delivery rate on H7 that's less than 200. I'm looking at allocations option 2, the last tab on NWBC 26C, which shows 1,675 dwellings delivered over a period of 8 years. So that gives an average of 209. I think that is considerably higher than the average rate that's contained within the Lichfield start to finish, which for a site of this size would be around 120 dwellings. So I think there is quite a considerable difference between national trends and what the council is assuming on some of these sites.
Thank you. I was just writing that down. Mrs. Barrett, any comments? I mean, it changes if we're under option 1, doesn't it? But any comments on that? Sorry, Mr. Dittman, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sir. Just to help clarify, when I was looking at the two options, option 2 had a slightly later expectations in terms of the start for the A5 improvements. We did bring forward, backward, I suppose you would class it as you're going further into time, some of the delivery of H7. So that's why you will get a slight difference between the allocations in option 1 and the allocations in option 2. The allocation in option 1, I think, as Mr. Sitch said, is the one that more accurately reflects their earlier submission. So to some extent, it is the council trying to address pressures hitting that site, and that's where that's anomaly. Although the end delivery, which is the 1675, is exactly the same in both circumstances. I note what Mr. Cox has said, but I would perhaps dispute as whether it was that considerable that it would have such a significant impact in terms of non-delivery. If we can bring development sooner, obviously that's up to the applicant and the site developer, then that would further address this. So there is an element of crystal ball gazing here, I suppose, is the polite way of saying it, in terms of how we can fit that 1675 into those A5 improvements schedules, and that is why we've shown, for want of a better word, two options as potential. There is an element of overlap in terms of the delivery that could happen with both of those. So I don't see that as a critical issue, and the figures shown in that option 2 we still think are achievable at a 40 to 50 per annum with a 5 retail outlet opportunity, and in most circumstances we will be looking at a 4 anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point about the number of retail outlets, that came through in your response, didn't it, to INSP 20 or one of my letters. So I think that was a helpful clarification. Mr. Austin Fell, and then I would like to, Mrs. Barrett, I see you've appeared. I'd like to hear from Mr. Austin Fell, and then probably I would like to ask the question, I know we've discussed site allocations in detail, and we will, but just as something so I can look through the relevant points. H7 we talked about in a fair amount of detail. I know we've talked about individual site viability in previous sessions, but it would be very helpful if you could have a think in the background about where there are particular issues on particular potential allocations, where there is a strong dispute in terms of site-specific circumstances that may affect delivery, so that when we come to site allocations, we can make sure we cover those. I think that's just a general point. If you could have Mrs. Barrett and Mr. Ditman, if you could have a think about that in the background, that would be really useful to frame our discussion on allocations. But now let me come to Mr. Austin Fell. Yeah, you still got your hand up. Brilliant.
Thank you. So just a very discrete point, building on what has already been said. It appears to me, following the discussions taking place here, that the difference between options 1 and options 2 presented for site H7 are less to do with the evidence base in terms of deliverability and the number of potential outlets that can occupy the site. It's more about fitting the 1675 within the plan period at whatever cost. It's, as I see it, so it's been a little bit back to front rather than taking an accurate appraisal of deliverability for option 2 and assessing whether it's realistic to expect 4 to 5 outlets to actually come forward on this site at one time. So I'm a little concerned that the evidence base there is somewhat lacking, and I share Mr. Cox's view that simply upping the numbers in terms of option 2, for example, for 3 years we're looking at 225 dwellings on this site here. I'm simply not convinced that the evidence base is there to suggest that there will be 4 or 5 different outlets available at the time. I'm willing to accept further submissions from the council on that point, but I simply do not see it. I don't want to invite a trawl through the evidence base in similar scenarios on other sites, because I do appreciate we're putting site H7 under the crosshairs here, but in the submissions I've made, sir, I've equally looked through the proposed allocations by the council, applying the Lichfield start to finish as a proxy to go with, and I feel that we arrive at a similar conclusion on a number of those allocations as we do to site H7. I do feel it's great advertisement here for Lichfield, because their start to finish document is probably in the submissions 4 or 5 times, but it's there because we don't have a suitable proxy for understanding delivery in North Warwickshire, because simply we haven't seen growth delivered at this scale before. So we need to go back to the evidence that needs to inform the total numbers for each of these sites, H7 including, rather than doing it as a built-in process to try and make the numbers fit. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's very clearly put. I think I will obviously ask the council if they want to say anything, but I will take that as a sort of as an observation, as I think that comes through, as you mentioned, very strongly in the additional local plan consultation response from yourselves and from others. And that is something that we have exchanged correspondence with the council before in terms of flexibility, retail outlets and the like. Are there any last points on this before we move on to the matter of reserve sites that the council would like to mention? I mean, in terms of the convincing justification for delivery in line with those anticipated figures?
The only thing that I'd like to say, sir, is that in terms of H7, which is our largest allocation, as you've heard, we've got the agents for that development saying that they agree with our trajectory, and it's been a two-way process that we've worked with them on that trajectory. So I'm not sure quite what else we can do to convince everybody that what we feel is right for the borough is what you have in front of you. So I'm not sure what else evidence we can provide you with, sir.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think we're now at a similar point that I've heard everything that I need to. And we will come back to site allocations, and yeah, helpful to have a think in the background if there are any particular ones we need to discuss. I have flagged up some. So unless anyone has any other comments, and I'm just looking to see the various ways those comments might come. No. I would move on to paragraph 30 of INSP 5B. Is the trigger for local plan review, and I'm terribly sorry I put main modification 39, I meant MM 35 in NWBC 20E, the latest schedule, that was my fault. Is the trigger for local plan review clear, and would it be effective? Now, I've got Countryside Properties who made a representation on this. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to this point. I'm just in the meantime going to get up that modification to the trigger. I'm wondering if I've tied myself completely in knots. MM35, as I have it, is additional employment land.
It is, sir. I think it's 7.35 or 7.35 is the paragraph number.
2 seconds. Let me just go there. Yeah. So I've misled everyone twice. Good.
No, it's at the start, isn't it? If I could direct you, sir, I think it's paragraph 1.9, isn't it, that in the plan that refers to the review of a plan, because I'm not sure if this is the right point, but it's the fact that it's in the wording of the plan and not in the policy of the plan.
Yes, that was. Thank you for getting me out of a hole there. So actually, I see that the current potential main modification that we have in NWBC 20E is MM7, isn't it? It relates to what is meant by a meaningful change and an early review, plan in whole or part. Noting that there is also, as Mrs. Barrett mentioned earlier, there is also now a statutory requirement to review a plan every 5 5 years. I believe we discussed this at the previous hearings, and I believe there was some discussion as to whether that should be a policy or whether it's sufficient that it's in explanatory text. I believe that is, as you say, what I was getting at in that question. Have you? Does anyone want to speak to that, or indeed have the council got any views on that matter?
If I could say so, that I think in the Turley papers there is a suggested wording for a policy that actually goes with that. I mean, in my opinion, I believe that the local plan is read as a whole, and so whether it is in the paragraph 1.8, it still carries weight. But there is the suggested wording in the Turley's wording. But I presume that we'll be talking about this when we come to LP6A, because an awful lot of what's been suggested in their wording is very much reflective of what's in LP6A. So they're all tied together in one way or another. So it all depends on where you wish to go with LP6A and perhaps the Turley suggestions, and then also this as well.
Okay, so I mean, from your perspective, and I'll come on to Mr. Sitch, who's popped his hand up. You wouldn't necessarily object to that early review provision being incorporated in a policy, but equally your view is that the plan is read as a whole and therefore there's no necessity. So yeah.
And also, if it's in the NPPF that we have to review the plan, well, we shouldn't be repeating something that's already in that national framework. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I've got those points. Mr. Sitch.
Thank you, sir. I think it's a very helpful discussion, and I think Ms. Barrett's confirmation that no objection for the inclusion of a policy, I think, is where the discussion we had at the first hearings, and would welcome a policy. So I think that's certainly what I'm seeing at other local plan examinations recently. The preference for a policy. The wording of that policy is obviously important to ensure its implementation, but I don't think we should be relying on the NPPF. I think the direction of travel that I'm seeing is for a local plan review policy. For local plan review to be set out in a policy rather than the actual supporting text. So just if that's helpful, sir, to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. What I will do is I will put that on a list of actions to think about as we go forward. Sorry if I just mute myself briefly while I'm tapping away. Okay. Thank you. I can't see any other hands up. So then I would like to come on to question 31. And this has some interaction. I've got Nexus on this. I mean, it has some interaction with what we were talking about earlier in terms of the A5 and what is currently Reserve Housing Site 1, mentioned by Mr. Tustain, I believe, earlier. There was also some discussion in the last set of hearings whether RH1 should be brought forward in any event to enable that, or whether there was effectively a reason why it should not be brought forward. But my question is, should any reserve sites be brought forward with the objective of meeting their housing requirement? That's the first part of it. I suppose that is one way in which there is some flexibility in the plan, as Mrs. Barrett mentioned previously. And the second question is, are the circumstances and timings of that process sufficiently clear? So does anyone want to speak to those points, or shall I? Yes, Catherine O'Toole. Anyone else? So yes, 3 people. So Catherine O'Toole, Cameron Ostenfeld, and Roger Tustain. Let's go in that order.
Thank you, sir. We'd just like to make a quick comment on reserve site RH2, which can come forward early in the plan period to help the early delivery of housing, as we've discussed earlier today. The site is not reliant on the A5 improvements and has been subject to pre-app discussions with the local planning authority and the county council. We have a scheme ready to go which demonstrates the site's deliverable now and will address the 3 provisions listed in the draft policy. And it's also in terms of timing, it's noted that MM95 states that it's expected that site allocation H20 will be delivered in advance of RH2 unless circumstances change. Obviously, both sites have been identified as suitable for residential development, so in our view, there's no need to delay delivery of one until the other has been delivered.
Thank you. And I was just looking through my notes as I remember something on that previously. So that was a comment specifically about RH2.
Correct.
So that's land north of Annesley Common.
Yes.
The I'm going through my notes, as you might tell, but MM95 and MM96 relate to it. It is expected that the site allocation H20 will be delivered in advance of the reserve site RH2 unless circumstances change. I think that's bundled up in my pointer. Is it clear what are those circumstances? So I've got a point about RH2, which we've heard its kind of status. So thank you very much for that. Let me bundle these up. So let me put that with Mr. Ostenfeld. Did you want to make some points in this context?
Yes, thank you, sir. It might come as no surprise that I am supportive of the principle for reserve sites for the reasons we've discussed previously. I think at the moment, we need to sort of be clear about what we're trying to achieve with the reserve sites, because, it can be very easy to put something into policy that lacks sufficient efficacy and simply does not sort of get delivered. In principle, I think we need reserve sites because of what I've identified and others have identified as a bit of a shortfall in the mid years of the plan. And the whole purpose of this, sir, is to try and ensure that the plan can, retain its primacy here and we don't get caught in another Section 78 Wild Wild West scenario. So what I propose, sir, is that we need to have a number of sites that can be proven to be deliverable, sites that are, shovel ready, that the evidence base has been done, there is clear intention to deliver, there is preferably a house builder on board with the scheme. And so there need to be triggers in order to make sure that these sites can come forward at an appropriate time. It is not simply enough to put, as the council have, that these sites will come forward when needed. We have to have a firm and clear trigger. And in my mind, sir, what we're talking about here is the housing land supply, and that being a factor to necessitate the need for reserve sites to come forward. So what I would propose here, sir, is becoming sort of quite firmly linked to a number, whether this is 5.5 years or 6 years, as Stratford have recently proposed in their emerging site allocations document. But what this does is ensure that we catch the supply position before it falls too low. It is simply not enough to say the housing land supply is no longer present, we will release sites, because that is too late in the process. We need to have something where we're monitoring on an annual basis the delivery of sites, and where we reach a position where we think that there is sufficient harm or need for a trigger, then these sites can come forward. So as I've mentioned, sir, on behalf of our client, sort of Taylor Wimpey, we've previously promoted land at Tamworth Road as a viable prospect. You'll note through in examination document AD 50 that we were unsuccessful at appeal previously on this site in 2018. We did address all technical issues as part of that proposal, bar some conflict with the proposed meaningful gap, albeit you'll now note that that is changing in shape and iteration. But what I suggest, sir, is that we just need to take a fresh look at what sites could come forward. I propose that the sites that should be considered here are those around sort of up to 200 houses, because perhaps when we start looking at quantums greater than that, you introduce uncertainty in terms of the infrastructure that might be required. You introduce uncertainty about phasing and delivery. These sites need to be ready to come forward as and when. We would sort of welcome further discussions at that point. But sir, just for clarity, I do think that we can have a policy which introduces a greater quantum of reserve sites at this stage without frustrating the plan process, because I'm very mindful, sir, that the examination has gone on quite some time already, and you need the certainty to make sure that this plan can be driven through to soundness, at the earliest opportunity. And I think that can be done as part of the current remit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And can I just ask, while you're on the line, effectively, one question, which is in terms of the existing reserve sites. We've heard about RH2 from Catherine O'Toole. We've heard briefly earlier, I believe, about RH1. RH3 is a slightly different thing, but do you have particular concerns about the deliverability of those sites?
You might be alluding, sir, to part of the representations we've made on this one already. I'm not kind of casting any aspersions over the deliverability of RH3, other than to say that this seems to be introduced without a comprehensive review of the evidence base before it. The council themselves have indicated as part of MM72 to NWBC 20E that the site itself is subject to flooding, and further work will be needed. A detailed level 3 FRA will be needed to provide greater certainty of the extent of the developable area. That to me does ring some alarm bells that perhaps, even though it's a small site, we don't yet have the confidence that it can be delivered compliant with national policy.
Okay. Thank you. So your suggestion, in essence, is that to ensure that the plan achieves what it seeks to, there needs to be further consideration to additional reserve sites. Some concerns, in particular, about site RH3. Got that, Brill. I'll put that to the council. I've also taken on board Catherine O'Toole's comments. Maybe now I turn to Mr. Tustain and then get the council's view.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I mean, RH1 is pretty integrated with the council's long-term strategy of delivering the Grenton bypass. And I think my concern is it's a fairly significant site. I think it can deliver in the planned period in association with infrastructure. So my argument is actually there's RH1 should be an allocation, and this should be worked. It should be worked up collaboratively with the council, with the county council, and with Highways England, to deliver a comprehensive master plan and delivery strategy that will deliver housing and the road, albeit I think that will be towards the latter part of the plan period. We've already seen through the early discussions about the Highway England's and the County Council's aspirations for the A55 corridor. We've been invited to have discussions with the county and Warwickshire about master planning RH1 and working with the and Highways England to come up with a sufficient road dual carriageway corridor within the site and master planning the land around that. So the council is proposing to safeguard land within RH1 to assist in the delivery of key infrastructure. There's a reserve housing site which the principle of development is established in terms of the council are content in strategic planning terms it's an appropriate site. So the issue we have really, or the concern I have, is that the policy as worded provides absolutely no certainty that RH1 will come forward. Its only trigger at the moment is the 5-year land supply, so it may or it may not be needed. In fact, I think the wording of the proposed modification, it says the sites will be released before the end of the plan period if there is a need to maintain an enhanced supply. I think the certainty is important for two reasons. Firstly, the site is being positively promoted by the landowner who successfully sold phase 1 and phase 2 of Dairy House Farm. They've promoted it themselves. They've got a project team on board and they're instructing that project team now. They want to work with the local authority. We've been invited to work with the authorities on master planning and providing technical evidence towards the master planning, which we're happy to do. But there's there's still that uncertainty issue. It has a high risk because the council, whilst a lot of reserve sites do naturally come forward through plan reviews, the council could fundamentally change its strategy through the local plan review. So we think the certainty is important now to ensure that the strategic site which delivers strategic infrastructure is allocated in a plan, and it sends the right message to the landowners and the council that we're working in an integrated way. I think potentially the more important point of certainty is that I alluded to earlier on, where the council are going to be going through a process of bidding for highway investment through either HIF funding or through the RIS programme. It's very clear if you read the RIS 2 documentation that schemes for funding are given significant advantages if they deliver directly housing development and if there's development contributions that can contribute towards such funding. So I see the Grendon bypass as being a critical bit of infrastructure for the long-term growth of the area. And this scheme, in just as a reserve status, could potentially undermine the future bidding that the county council and the district want to make to secure that funding. So I think it's I think they're inextricably linked. I think the road, designing the road, designing the master plan, and an appropriate allocation is critical, but there's no policy to actually support that at this point in time. So I think the importance of releasing this reserve site in particular is twofold. Is to provide additional housing supply later on in the plan period, but probably more importantly is to secure the delivery of the phase 3 of the A5 works, which I think it is a major part of. So I think that's the key argument I want to make for this current question on the examination.
Thank you. That was that was all very clear. So now I'm going to take those points, including the ones you've just made, and pass them over to the council. I've heard effectively that arguments have been made that both RH1 and RH2 are effectively ready to go, and Mr. Tustain has said that RH1, insofar as it relates to the A5, is potentially very significant. I've also heard some concern about whether the trigger for when, if those sites are not seen as acceptable for bringing forward before, when those sites are triggered in terms of being reserves, and how that aligns with certain metrics like a shortfall in supply at the right stage. So that sort of bundle of issues. Could I turn to Mrs. Barrett? I see you're nodding, so hopefully that won't come as a surprise. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of the sites that you have before you, sir, the reserve housing sites, there are some issues that need to be addressed before we feel comfortable that they could become a full allocation. However, I can see the issue, particularly with our RH1, that we are keen to make sure that that will facilitate the Grendon bypass. But there are some questions with that. In the original submissions, ourselves and Mr. Tustain's clients were very miles apart in terms of the number of units that could be delivered there, because our main focus was to safeguard the route of the A5 bypass, but we don't know the exact trajectory of where that route should go. So wherever the dual carriageway will go will impact on the number of units that can then be actually be delivered. So although we're saying that there is a minimum there of for Dairy House Farm, it's 360 units. The agents have actually said that could be a lot higher. But until we know where that bypass route is, we're not going to know what the exact figure is. So we've had a look at the policy itself and seen whether well, what are the issues that we need to address for all three of the sites? On 2, it's access issues, so that would be RH1 and RH2. So RH1 is the safeguarding. Well, where exactly is that safeguarding for the A5 going to fall within that site? With RH2, it's access again into that site. Where exactly is that going to be? There are issues within the Annesley Common area because of the amount of development taking part in Nuneaton and impacting on various junctions. So they need to be addressed before we could say, yes, that is a oven ready site to go ahead. In terms of RH3, in all the time I've been at the Borough Council, which is a considerable time, that site has never flooded, although it now falls within a floodplain. So we're confident that the site will come forward for development, but until that further flood risk assessment has taken place, I can't confirm again the exact numbers that will be delivered on that site. But again, we're confident that those 3 sites will come forward at some stage. So in terms of the allocations then, and to make it clearer, I wondered whether if we took out of the policy in MM73, if it took out the need to maintain and enable supply against the 5-year housing supply, and it's as soon as the issues of access and the flooding can be overcome, which may take some time and some years to come, as Mr. Tuston says, it could be towards the end of the plan period, but at least that would give some idea that the development is being proactively being sought, but we can't allocate it as so. Well, I don't feel that we have enough information to say it should be formally allocated as a proper local plan allocation, because I still think there is just some queries there that need to be addressed before they do come forward.
So if I can just maybe help, maybe not.
That would be good.
So clearly, and I can see some hands raised, there is a difference of opinion as to sort of how certain things are on these sites, and that's inevitable. There's always differences of opinion. But what you were saying there is you could consider changing the trigger, instead of being to maintain supply when such issues are resolved. But at the moment, you don't feel that you have sufficient certainty to sort of justify that as an allocation. I can understand that. I think my concern with that, though, is it changes their purpose from a reserve site in the plan as submitted. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but it changes their purpose from a reserve site to an allocation, effectively contingent on resolving certain issues. So I would like to explore first, and I've put this on my list of actions, the clarity around the review, sort of the release mechanism. I'm not making much sense, but the point at which consideration will be given to reserve sites coming forward, with reference to their sort of intended purpose as a reserve site. So when I think it was mentioned by Mr. Austin Fell, where, say, land supply drops to within a year of something or other. So I would like the council to give consideration to whether that, as a first stage, to whether that mechanism for where those sites potentially come online to be considered. I've put that on my list of actions. On the separate point around uncertainties, whether that's in terms of access, in terms of flooding, or in terms of other issues, is actually the council's argument that those aren't so much reserve sites in terms of supply, but actually they are sites which are, in theory, broadly acceptable for development, but there are just certain issues that can't be resolved at this stage. There's a slight distinction, do you see it, in terms of timing and supply and actually certainty. So I just wanted to, I want the council to have a look at the review mechanism, and then I would like to know clearly whether those sites are effectively reserve and therefore related principally to ensuring supply, or whether those issues are simply site-specific matters to be clarified.
If I could ask the question though, sir, in terms of if they became an allocation, say, but there is such questions over the amounts of development, because if we're saying it's in the 400s, but the agents are saying, well, it could be up to 1,000.
Right.
Where does that fall into this? And that's where I have always thought that a reserve housing site was one that is capable of being developed, and we wish to bring forward at some stage, but there are the issues, because if a site is oven ready, that would be the allocations. In our opinion, they should be the allocations, or the oven ready sites where they're ready to put the shovels in the ground, they'll meet the trajectory, because they've been put forward to us as sites that will deliver the number of housing. So there are then these additional sites, the emission sites, but it's the allocations that we've focused on in terms of, we believe that they're the oven ready sites that are the ones that we want to bring forward as quickly and as proactively as possible. But with the reserve housing sites being the flexibility, but knowing that there are a few issues that just can't be resolved today, but we know it can be.
Yes, yeah, I see. So what I would suggest then, in terms of the clarity around the trigger, it doesn't have to be a single thing. You know, it can be, well, the reserve sites will, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I'm not putting words in your kind of, in what you want to propose, but the reserve sites will be considered at such point that housing land supply forecast is forecast to fall below a certain level, subject to the resolution of X, Y, and Z issues in relation to RH1, X, Y, and Z in relation to RH2 and RH3. So it can take that form. But from what you've said, as I see it, the reserve sites are ones where at present you can't be certain, although there are some indications that they are in principle acceptable for development. But at some point down the line, they may become acceptable. And I think that trigger is just about clarifying exactly when that is in terms of what justifies their release. And that's Mr. Austin Fell's point in terms of timing and ensuring supply. And, you know, the debate we've just been having with Catherine O'Toole and Mr. Tustain in terms of what would need to be considered in order to get them to that point. I hope that makes sense, and I would like some tightening up of that trigger, I think, just to make sure. And you know, when I say I would like and everything like that, it's simply because referring back to what I'm doing in terms of soundness, I need to be clear when certain things happen, that the plan is deliverable, that there are clear, you know, there's a clear kind of process to follow. So if you're happy to take that away, I will look at it in the next version of the schedule of main modifications. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't come back to Catherine O'Toole and Roger Tustain. Can I take you two in that order?
Yes, mine's just a quick clarification on RH2, where I think our main issue, from what the council was saying, is just the access and possibly the junctions as well. We have been engaged in discussions with the county council in order to get a resolution to that, and we do believe we have one in mind. Okay,
thank you. I'll certainly take that as a point. Can I turn to Mr. Tustain in terms of RH1, presumably?
Yes, thank you, sir. Yeah, the council's clarified that. I mean, our concern was really the fact that the wording, the reserve site, just didn't give us that certainty. If the spirit of the policy is much more a case of we want to work with you, and come up with a solution for this site, then that gives me far more confidence. I mean, if you look at para 47 of the 2012 framework, it's basically saying identify a supply of specific developable sites or broad locations for growth for years 6 to 10. So it's perfectly reasonable to have this area as a broad location for growth, and we can work with the council on coming up with a specific capacity once we can work with the Highways Agency or Highways England on the road alignment. But our main concern was the fact that the trigger was housing land supply, and that trigger may never happen, in which case my client would be potentially investing a lot of work and effort into something that may never happen. But if the council can give us certainty that they are confident to work with us and the site will come forward, that's the differential, will rather than might, I think we'd be satisfied with that and be more than happy working collaboratively with the council from now onwards on that site to clarify capacity.
Thank you. I think that's helpful in terms of certainly, and I would encourage the council to work with the relevant individuals in forming up that main modification, potentially number 73, that just clarifies what the status of reserve sites is and indeed what circumstances would need to be in place for them to be brought forward. Thank you. I've got that on my list now. I'm just thinking about timings. So we've gone through INSP 5B question 30, the trigger for local plan review. Reserve sites, I think I've heard sufficient on that, and the council is going to look at a clarificatory main modification and propose something to me in that respect. Affordable housing. Now, again, this is one example where there has been fairly extensive toing and froing between us in terms of letters from me to the council and back in terms of affordable housing thresholds, justification and viability. Is there anyone here who wants to raise any points on affordable housing? Dr. Doggett, and then Catherine O'Toole.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just wanted to raise the question, I think particularly in relation to the current development of the beaches site at the top of H7, at the bottom of Common Lane, which is currently being built out, and where recently, in fact, I'm not technical, but I think they probably were boring with an auger pile to put the houses in. And really just because as I understand it from the Planning Commission, that site originally had a 40% affordable housing target, but on further planning application, that was reduced to 13%. And I suppose that site seems to I don't know whether that site is any different from the rest of H7 in terms of its land quality. It does appear that they've had to do some boring. And I suppose my question is about the viability, really, that if the council, because that planning request to reduce to 13% was approved by the council, what that speaks about viability, not just in terms of how much affordable housing will be delivered on the H7 site, but also if it is delivered, how that would affect, because I think in the discussion about that planning, there was also a discussion about whether to reduce the amount of Section 106 money, the whole question of the wider viability to infrastructure for H7 and facilities and making the site viable in its broader sense in terms of so it's a bigger question than just if that's representative. And in fact, the assessment was that only 13%, or I think another assessment, maybe 19% of affordable housing was just about viable. How does that reflect on viability, both with regard to affordable housing, but also with regard to infrastructure and facilities on the wider site and amenities and funding for facilities that will make it more than an estate and make it a site which is part of a community with the suitable facilities.
Thank you very much. Well, I will sort of put that directly to the council. I would just say that in terms of specific planning applications, I have to be quite careful that I don't sort of express a view on those. But I understand that what you were saying was by way of a sort of proxy as a general example of one instance where affordable housing has, for whatever reason, been reduced beyond that which was originally anticipated. Can I get the council's view on that as a general point?
Yeah, there will be applications that will have less than the policy requirements, mainly because of the changes that the applicant can put in information about the viability of the scheme, if there's any abnormal developments costs and things like that. In the case of that particular site, yeah, there was particular issues, but I'm not because the viability work has been done for the local plan as a whole, and then the allocations, we're confident that at this moment in time that we can bring forward the services and facilities and affordable housing. But at the time of a planning application, that can always be reviewed. There will always be that situation, and however much we can plan forward, of course we won't be able to deal with that until we get the planning application. But the information that we have at the moment is that there should be the ability to provide for 40% affordable on greenfield sites and 30% on brownfield sites.
Thank you. And I would just note, and I saw Mr. Dittman, you perhaps wanted to come in as well. I know that the certainly since we've been in examination, the planning practice guidance has been updated that very much reflects that it is now the onus on someone that is proposing to change the proportion of a development contribution to demonstrate why the assumptions that led into the plan have changed, why that is no longer viable. That's so that's something that will have to be considered in planning applications afterwards. But Mr. Dittman, did you want to mention something?
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, yes, it does very much obviously depend on the circumstances of the case, and obviously I'm aware of the Laurel Avenue having a number of issues of former 17th to 19th century pits being found, which, being in its location, that potentially is a risk. However, other elements of the site don't necessarily have the same implications. There is some former mining in other areas, but the Taylor Wimpey site to the south of Grendon Road, which has already been developed and was originally part of the application site, albeit that was developed on a former open cast part of the site, that has still managed to achieve I think it's the 40%, if not 40, at least 30% affordable housing requirement. That is the site that has already been developed through Taylor Wimpey. Similarly, the site to the north of Grendon Road has had a similar circumstance. There are other issues, obviously, if they come forward with a funding contribution rather than an on-site delivery that can impact on an application, and which, unfortunately, at this stage, the local plan has little or no control over, because that will depend on the circumstances of the applicant at the time of the application. But in strategic terms, in the delivery terms, our understanding is that we can achieve the 30% on brownfield and 40% on the greenfield. And I would just refer to NWBC 26D, which is the update to the viability that you refer to, and that is referred to in question 32, particularly paras 19 to 23, which sort of set the scenario, particularly with regard to future infrastructure delivery that Dr. Doggett did refer to, because there is always that concern. The conclusion is para 24 that states that our consultant still believes that is achievable, but he does highlight from your own question, sir, of the potential for greater growth, up to the 47%, I think was your original suggestion. Isn't really achievable, and he stands by his original recommendations. Nevertheless, I still have to put a further caveat to that, given your question. Are there circumstances where 40% is achievable? And I would say, yes, there are. And this can skew the overall delivery. For instance, Catherine O'Toole's situation is adjoining the former Wesley Home site, which, going back to 2006, was a site allocation, Anscombe 1. And Wesley Homes at that time came forward with a proposal for 100% affordable. Obviously, as an RSL deliverer, that was their prime function, but they saw that site as achievable and deliverable based on that percentage. So again, I come back to the circumstance, very much dependent on the circumstances of the site, but also on the circumstances of the developer. Thanks, sir. That's all I need to say.
Thank you. That's very clear. And while you were saying that, I was just looking at the precise phrasing of LP9, which I believe is a minimum, isn't it? So all major development should seek to provide, and this is potential main modification 45, should seek to provide a minimum of 30%. So yeah, okay. That's all very clear. Now, Catherine, I'm sorry, Catherine O'Toole, you've had your hand up for a little bit. Is there a point you wanted to raise in respect of affordable housing?
Yes, there is. We know that the potential Mayor Mod 16 supports the provision of above policy affordable housing. On RH2, the scheme we've currently got drawn up for phase 1 would be a 100% affordable scheme, similar to the site Mike referred to that it's adjacent to. Obviously, in the context of we know that North Warwickshire has a high need for affordable housing and potentially some issues in delivering that, particularly given the pandemic and delays to this plan. The issues of affordability and need are only likely to increase and become more urgent. So it's something that RH2 can help with delivering now.
Thank you. That's a helpful explanation. I would suggest that you, Mr. Tustian, and the council get together in terms of clarifying that how reserve sites are dealt with, and that's a very helpful nod also to the point, as you say, that I think we have it. You knew it better than me. MM6, which or is it 7? 6. That I suggested, based on the exchanges between myself and the council, that reference should be made to the potential for allowing additional development to support objectives around affordable housing provision, given that the 47% as the latest housing market update would not be met. So thank you for raising that. Okay, I think Mrs. Barrett.
It was just a point of clarification, sir. On LP9, under MM45, I don't see the word minimum. And it was just to, it's on page 21 of that paper. And I just wanted just to clarify that.
I thought, no, I'm sorry, there's, and I think we're going to have this a few times, just a little bit of version control here, really. As I saw it, LP9 is potentially modified by MM45. God, that's a mouthful. Was looking towards 30% on brownfield sites and 40% on greenfield sites. That may be where I've got expressed as a minimum, but I think I'm right in saying you were looking towards, of all the thresholds, a minimum of 30%. Is that?
Oh, we're happy to include that, sir. It's just that it's not in there at the moment.
Oh, no.
So
well,
it would just be.
I'm not necessarily suggesting that is. I think the threshold was 30 or 40%. Am I right in that?
That's right. It is, sir.
Which, sorry, that was my informal reading of you're looking for between 30 and 40%, thus a minimum of 30%. So no, I I don't think that needs to be expressed as a minimum because that's inherent. But
that's fine. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
No, that's a good clarification. Thank you. Okay. I think that's everything I wanted to raise on INSP 5B. I've kept a note of the actions. I'll read them out in a minute as far as I have them. We need to return at some point to the stepped trajectory in what in the light of what I've heard. I have maybe a couple of actions for the council on that, and perhaps if we can talk about that on Thursday morning. But what I would suggest indicatively is that, well, in fact, I would strongly suggest that at around 2015, 2016, when the Coventry and Warwickshire Strategic Housing Market Assessment came out, some joint negotiation there, and the appeal we talked about earlier, to reflect reality at that stage, I would suggest that the step trajectory needs to move to at least 264, I think is the figure I have in my mind at that stage. Now that has implications for the tail end of the plan period in terms of working towards the overall number, which I have indicated previously without prejudice the outcome is broadly in the right territory. So I would ask that the council before Thursday morning have a look at a sort of main modification to that effect, and then consider the sort of consequential implications for calculating undersupply and looking forward to a 5-year land supply, just so we can go through the maths effectively of that. But I've heard what I need to hear about the principles on that, the methodology, and in terms of the sites. So that would be great. Is that okay?
Yes, sir, we'll work towards that. And would you like to, for that to be shared beforehand, or for us just to bring it on Thursday morning?
Ideally, if it could be shared beforehand as an updated note, that'll be great. If it can't be, we can talk it through just as a continuation of our discussions this morning. So
okay, we'll try our best to get a note out to make it easier.
Okay, thank you. Now, I just wanted to raise a few more points. Have we got a representative? I have to be careful what I say there, because I'm not sure who's representing them now. Sorry, Councillor Chambers, did you want to mention something? I've seen your screen, but not your hand necessarily.
No, Chairman. I just wanted to, if you're closing, just say goodbye and thank you, but we're not there yet.
Thank you.
Just so you can see my face. That's all.
Not quite yet, but no, thank you in advance. But have we got a representation from Cathedral Agricultural Partnership here?
Yes, sir.
That would be Michael Davies, sir.
I'm sorry, Michael Davies, for not knowing that. I had you down on point 33 of INSP 5B, whether policy LP9 is consistent with NPPF paragraph 2012 insofar as viability is concerned. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. I may have put you on the spot. I believe it was something to do with the potential excessive requirements, given how viability is treated in that policy. As you can tell, I'm slightly clutching at straws. But if you would, would you like to speak to that, or shall I just be led by your submission to the additional local plan consultation?
I'm happy to do both, but it's not a huge point. It was just one of reflection, really, that we've spoken to the council in pre-app discussions about the former. I mean, it's a similar point to Mr. Doggett, really, that until we spend several £100,000 drilling into the site and understanding exactly what is there, there is a question mark over
the approach that's been taken to affordable housing, just in terms of greenfield and brownfield. And it's a kind of it's a subtle point, but one that's kind of wasn't taken on board by the council's consultants, just in terms of they treated the site as a greenfield, because in technical terms it is greenfield. It's grassed over, it's re-established itself, but of course it's a potentially contaminated greenfield site. But I think, like we've just discussed, until we start doing the detailed ground conditions work, we don't actually know the answer to that question, which isn't uncommon on these sites. But it was just one in terms of the percentage of affordable housing that's applied.
But from your perspective, the policy that is there, subject to any potential main modification as set out in the schedule, provides sufficient flexibility, does it? I think that was where I was getting at. So, of course, if abnormal things occur that affect viability, and for whatever reason a site is no longer viable, then it's open to someone to make an argument that that's the case. But I just wanted to check that policy LP9 is okay from your perspective in that respect, in terms of viability.
Yes, I mean, it provides the flexibility that we're looking for.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If I can, so I'm getting near the end of my questions. I don't think there's a representative from Tamworth Borough Council on the line. The point raised there was paragraph 35, which is to some extent an overlap with the point earlier that should certain sites or houses be sort of earmarked for neighbouring authorities. Question very quickly on that one is specific reference necessary to cooperative working with neighbouring authorities regarding infrastructure demands and provisions? Now, clearly, there are already various references in the local plan to that collaborative working, but I'd just like to get the council's view very quickly on point 35, please.
I believe, sir, that there's already references to cross-partnership working and cross-border working. So, and also, as part of the local plan process, we've got the statements of common grounds between, for example, the Staffordshire Education Department and Warwickshire County Education, so that they had come to a conclusion as to what any education requirements would be between the two boroughs, so that there was a clear distinction, and so that there wasn't any pushbacks, and that they were clear about how many children were going to be supported in the Tamworth area compared to this borough, and where any monies would be directed. And that's the same with the highway situation as well, with the Roby's Lane site, because the Staffordshire County Council Highways have already been involved with it, along with Warwickshire County Council. So I don't see that there is a need for any more to be put into the plan to cover that. But again, we'll be guided by your advice on that. But we believe that there is sufficient in the plan.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I've got both sides of that. It was very clear. Thank you. The last point that I really wanted to raise, aside from going through the actions and thinking forward a little bit, so hopefully that shouldn't take too long, is, and I believe I've asked this before, we've got the Greater Birmingham Strategic Growth Study, and I know it says there's no effective potential for delivering housing growth beyond 1.8% in North Warwickshire, which I understand is the existing number of homes 1.8% annually in that respect. And I know that I've seen other figures that show that the figure for the West Midlands is somewhere lower than that. But where does that figure come from? I mean, the question is it justified by appropriate evidence? I know a lot of focus is put on the fact that there is this sort of the council argues there's this upper limit, there's a threshold of what the market can deliver. that seems to be a fairly critical point, that household growth would amount to 1.8% year on year under the plan's proposal. Where does that phrase come from? What's the evidence underpinning it? That was potentially a horrible question to end on.
It is referred to in the G.L. Hearn Wood study, and I think that is paragraph 9.67. Thank you. So it's referred to in there, but it actually comes from, I think I'm trying to recall now, sir, because it either was in a SHMA or it was in some additional information from, well, it was G.L. Hearn at the time, it was Nick Island in the evidence for the local plan. So I'm afraid we'd have to probably do some digging to find out exactly where that reference came from, because I thought your question was about, are we happy with that? Rather than, well, where's the evidence for that 1.8 figures?
No,
so apologies for that.
No. Well, that potentially was a lack of clarity on my part, but no, it was. I mean, I see that number, and I also see from that study what has occurred in other neighbouring authorities. So the differential there is clear, but it was just, and I'll put that on the list of actions. If there is any clarity as to where the origins of that are, that would be very useful. So unless there are any more points of substance that anyone wants to make on the issues that we have raised, thank you very much for everyone's contribution. That's been very useful for me in terms of my understanding and hearing the various perspectives. I would just now, and I won't be offended if anyone does want to tune out at this point, I'll just now go through what I have as the list of actions arising from today. I've got 11 points, and then we'll talk about a bit more. I think the majority of things that we've discussed that we haven't resolved will be chalked up to the Thursday morning session. Without further ado, the things I have is in relation to potential main modification 27, that should be tweaked to reflect that the stepped housing trajectory is the basis for calculating a 5-year housing land supply in line with NWBC 24 Annex H. Which is the council's 5-year land supply document. I have spotted an error in a potential MM28, which relates to table 1. It's a very minor thing. The final row shows 2 years, whereas the column says it's for 1. That's a very administrative thing, is potentially my error. I will just note that to the council in writing so the reference is clear there. Main modification 71, which affects table 7 of the plan as submitted, that should be, as Mr. Dittman referred to earlier, updated to accurately reflect how lapse rates or fallout rates of planning permissions have been taken account. There was a point raised by Mr. Cox about ensuring consistency between allocations figures. Now, I looked those up during a break. NWBC 20E says allocations amount to 6,260. NWBC 26C says 6,280. I'm not necessarily saying that evidence needs to be sorted out in the past, but just in anything that goes forward, that should be, the numbers should be clarified. I would just ask, and this one isn't a specific modification, that we've reflected on the sort of the time stamp, if you like, for looking at housing completions data and anything subsequently. And there was a reference to MHCLG. I think it was Mr. Austin Fell, although I may be misremembering, to MHCLG data in that respect. It would just be a request to the council that if anything does come out in terms of monitoring from 2019 to 2020, or indeed anything comes out that they're aware of in respect of housing supply recently, just make me aware of that and pop it on the examination website so we've got the latest information. Thank you. This next one is a bit more detailed. Sorry, am I giving you enough time to write? Thank you. This next one is a bit more detailed, and it's to clarify, based on the strategic transport assessment, what happens to the, if I can call it the central section, or the purple line in AD 47 of the A5, with only phases 1 and 2 of the A5 project undertaken. And this goes to Mr. Dittman's point that paragraph 5.96 of the strategic transport assessment, just to clarify, if that is only phases 1 and 2 of the A5 project. Now, in the event that it is not, it includes more stuff, then, as we discussed, I presume the list of infrastructure projects in NWBC 26 should be altered to reflect the, the full extent of those that are critical to achieving the plan's strategy. And again, we're going to return to that under paragraph 56 of INSP 5B on the Thursday morning session. I have also, while I'm losing my voice, I have also asked the council just to have a think about any sites where there are particular disputes in terms of the forecast trajectory that we would need to discuss when we come on to site allocations. Yes, we've talked extensively, and thank you to Catherine O'Toole and Mr. Tustin on the trigger for how reserve sites are treated. I would like to see a revised potential main modification 73 that deals with their status, what would trigger their coming into consideration, and what needs to be addressed on those. We have talked, this is one of the last points, we talked about an updated stepped trajectory. I mentioned that, I think, at the start, in terms of how the sort of central years around 2015 to 2018 are dealt with, and how that affects the calculation of a 5-year land supply. We'll come back to that on Thursday, but it would be useful if we could have that then. And finally, if there is any evidence underpinning the household growth figure of 1.8% in the GL Hearn strategic growth study in relation to Birmingham, that would be useful to know the origins of. So those are the points as I have them. I hope everyone feels that the hearing has been fair and you've had the opportunity to contribute what you've wanted. If I haven't given you that opportunity and you're not at future sessions, now's your time. I see Mr. Sitch has taken me up on that. Mr. Sitch.
Yes, thank you, sir. That's a very helpful session today. Thank you, and also the list of actions. I think there was an additional one that you asked the council to look at, and the council agreed to, was in respect of a local plan review policy. And I think you invited them to consider a main modification in that regard.
Yeah,
my notes.
You are right. Yes, I have that. I have that. No, yeah.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. I've got it down in my notes that we were happy to have one, but we were awaiting your advice on that one, if that was thought to be the way forward. So we're happy to draft one if you wish.
What I would suggest is you, I think, and I forget, I'm not sure it was Mr. Sitch, I think it was someone else who mentioned other plans that have local plan review policies. What I would suggest before you jump is you have a look at some of those and see whether, sort of in substance, the elements that you have of the plan do what those policies would, or not. But I think it would be prudent to have a look at those to see. So, Mr. Sitch, was it you that mentioned other? Sorry, that was a bit unprofessional. Was it you that mentioned other plans?
It was, sir. Yes. I was thinking of Bedford recently, and also South Oxfordshire, Inspector Board recently. But there may be some other examples. Happy to share with Miss Barrett and Mr. Dittman, if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, no, it might just be useful of those, and then we'll return to that, and I'll ask the council whether kind of what their view is after having reviewed those. Thank you for that. I've
Thank you,
put
sir.
that on my list. Okay, has anyone else got any other points that they would like to raise? Anything that anyone wants to say that I haven't given the opportunity to? Okay. I can't see any hands. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your time, for your contributions, and I will. So I'm hearing some rustles. I will then adjourn, having gone through that administrative session. We're back tomorrow morning at 9:30, where we are talking about employment land provision in the morning, and in the afternoon we're talking about various environmental considerations, where indeed we will, I think, be talking about a site RH3, if I remember rightly, amongst lots of other things. So thank you. Okay, well, I adjourn the hearing then, and we will reconvene on some separate matters at 9:30 tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.